The lecture hall buzzed with nervous energy as Professor Kethvar adjusted the containment field controls. Students from 12 different species filled the tiered seating, their various forms of note-taking devices ready. The Galactic Academy's xenobiology course was notorious for its hands-on approach, but today's lesson promised to be particularly memorable. Today we study predatory behavior, announced the tall, mantis-like professor, his compound eyes scanning the diverse classroom. Understanding how predators think and hunt is essential for any xenobiologist working in the field. Near the back of the hall, Marcus Chen sat quietly among his classmates. The human exchange student had been attending the academy for 3 months now, and while his grades were excellent, he rarely spoke during lectures. His presence still made many students uncomfortable, though few would admit it openly. The Zephyrian sitting next to him, a blue-scaled reptilian named Sisk, leaned over and whispered, "I heard Professor Kethvar brought something really dangerous today. My cousin took this class last semester and said the final predator demonstration made half the class faint." Marcus nodded politely, but kept his attention on the professor, who was now activating a series of containment fields at the front of the classroom. 3 separate enclosures materialized, each containing what appeared to be empty space. "Our first specimen," Professor Kethvar announced, "is the Altarian Shadowstalker." With a flick of his claw, the first containment field shimmered, revealing a creature that seemed to be made of living darkness. It moved with fluid grace, testing the boundaries of its prison with what could only be described as calculated intelligence. Gasps echoed through the lecture hall. Even though the students knew they were safe behind multiple layers of protective barriers, the sight of the Shadowstalker sent instinctive fear rippling through the classroom. The creature was roughly the size of a large dog, but its movement suggested something far more dangerous. "Note the hunting posture," the professor continued, seemingly unaffected by his students' discomfort. "The Shadowstalker uses its natural camouflage abilities not just for protection, but as an active hunting tool. It can remain motionless for up to 6 standard hours, waiting for the perfect moment to strike." A Centaurian student raised one of her forearms. "Professor, what's its success rate when hunting?" "Approximately 93%, Kethvar replied matter-of-factly. "When a Shadowstalker commits to an attack, it very rarely fails to kill its target." Marcus watched the creature with clinical interest, while his classmates shifted uncomfortably in their seats. He noticed how it moved, the way it tested different sections of the containment field, apparently mapping its prison for weaknesses. "Our second specimen," the professor continued, activating the middle containment field, "is considerably more aggressive." The field revealed what looked like a metallic spider the size of a small vehicle. Its legs ended in razor-sharp points, and its mandibles clicked continuously as it immediately began attacking the barrier. "The Nexus Ripper," Professor Kethvar explained over the sound of claws on energy shields. "Unlike the Shadowstalker's patient approach, the Ripper relies on overwhelming force and speed. It can accelerate from 0 to 300 kilometers per hour in less than 2 seconds. Several students actually stood up, backing away from the front of the classroom despite the multiple safety barriers. The Ripper's aggression was visceral and terrifying, its attacks on the containment field creating flashes of light and crackling energy. "Its hunting strategy is simple but effective," the professor continued. "It identifies a target, charges at maximum speed, and uses its reinforced carapace as a battering ram while its claws tear through any defenses." "How do we defend against something like that?" asked a nervous Aquarian student, her gills fluttering rapidly. "Distance and barriers," Kethvar replied. "The Ripper is devastating in close combat but has limited ranged capabilities. However, it can chew through most standard materials given enough time." Marcus made a note in his datapad, but his expression remained calm. Sisk noticed this and whispered, "Aren't you scared? That thing could probably tear through a starship hull." "It's impressive," Marcus replied quietly, "but it's also predictable. Pure aggression usually is." As if to prove his point, the Ripper continued its relentless assault on the barrier, never varying its attack pattern or trying a different approach. "Now," Professor Kethvar said, his voice taking on a more serious tone, "for our final specimen. This creature is so dangerous that it has never been successfully contained for more than 72 hours. Every research facility that has attempted to study it has ultimately been forced to terminate the specimen. The entire lecture hall fell silent. Even the Ripper seemed to pause in its attacks, as if sensing something more dangerous nearby. "I present to you," the professor said, activating the final containment field, "the Void Hunter." The third enclosure revealed a creature that defied easy description. It was roughly humanoid in shape, but seemed to absorb light around it. Unlike the Shadowstalker's camouflage, this wasn't invisibility but rather an absence that hurt to look at directly. It stood perfectly still in the center of its containment field, and somehow that stillness was more terrifying than the Ripper's fury. "The Void Hunter," Professor Kethvar explained, his usual confident demeanor showing the first signs of unease, "is perhaps the most dangerous predator known to galactic science. It exhibits problem-solving abilities that rival sentient species, combined with physical capabilities that exceed most apex predators." Students were now actively backing toward the exits. The Void Hunter hadn't moved, hadn't attacked the barriers, hadn't shown any obvious signs of aggression. Yet every instinct in the room screamed danger. "What makes it so dangerous?" someone asked in a barely audible whisper. "Intelligence," the professor replied. "The other specimens operate on instinct and learned behavior. The Void Hunter thinks, plans, and adapts. It studies its environment and its prey, then develops specific strategies for each situation." As if responding to the discussion, the Void Hunter finally moved. It didn't attack the barriers or test them like the other creatures. Instead, it simply turned its head and looked directly at the students. The lecture hall erupted in panic. Students from multiple species began fleeing toward the exits, their various forms of terror vocalization filling the air. Even Professor Kethvar stepped back from his controls, but Marcus remained seated, studying the creature with the same calm interest he'd shown the others. The Void Hunter's attention seemed to fix on him, and for a moment that felt like an eternity. Human and apex predator regarded each other across the space between them. Then the Void Hunter did something that froze everyone's blood. It nodded just slightly as if acknowledging something it recognized. The emergency alarm pierced through the chaos as students continued to flee the lecture hall. Professor Kethvar's claws trembled as he reached for the emergency termination controls, but something made him hesitate. The human student, Marcus, remained calmly seated while the Void Hunter continued to stare in his direction. "Student Chen," the professor called out, his voice strained with barely controlled panic. "You need to evacuate immediately. The containment field won't hold if the creature decides to test it seriously." Marcus finally stood, but instead of heading for the exits, he moved closer to the front of the classroom. The remaining students who hadn't yet fled gasped audibly. Sisk, who had been halfway to the door, stopped and stared in disbelief. "Marcus, what are you doing?" Sisk hissed. "That thing is looking right at you." "I know," Marcus replied, his voice steady. He approached the control panel where Professor Kethvar stood frozen. "Professor, may I ask you something about the Void Hunter's behavior patterns?" Kethvar's compound eyes swiveled between Marcus and the contained predator. "This is hardly the time for academic discussion, Student Chen. That creature has killed 17 researchers across 4 different facilities." "Exactly," Marcus said, stopping just a few meters from the containment fields. "And yet it's not trying to break out. Look at its posture, its positioning. Does that seem like attack behavior to you?" Despite his terror, the professor's scientific training kicked in. He looked more carefully at the Void Hunter, which remained motionless in the center of its containment field. You're right. When previous specimens became agitated, they immediately began testing the barriers. The Shadowstalker is still hunting," Marcus observed, gesturing to the first containment field. The dark creature had resumed its patient stalking behavior, treating the students as potential prey even through the barriers. The Ripper is still attacking. The metallic predator continued its relentless assault on its prison. But the Void Hunter is observing, Professor Kethvar finished, his scientific curiosity beginning to overcome his fear. "It's watching us the same way we're watching it." The few students who remained in the lecture hall crept closer, drawn by the unexpected turn the demonstration had taken. Marcus stepped even nearer to the containment fields, and the Void Hunter's head tracked his movement with fluid precision. "In all the previous encounters," Marcus asked, What was the research protocol? How did the facilities approach studying it? Standard xenobiology procedures, the professor replied, his voice growing more confident as he fell back into teaching mode. Isolation, controlled environment, systematic testing of responses to various stimuli. So they treated it like an animal. Of course, it's a non-sentient predator, regardless of its intelligence level. Marcus paused in his approach, now close, enough that he could see his own reflection in the containment field's energy barrier. Professor, what if that assumption was wrong? Before Kethvar could respond, Marcus did something that would be talked about in academy circles for decades. He stepped directly in front of the Void Hunter's containment field and slowly, deliberately bowed. The lecture hall fell into absolute silence. Even the Ripper stopped its attacks as if sensing that something significant was happening. The Void Hunter remained motionless for several heartbeats, then stepped forward to the edge of its containment field and returned the bow with perfect mimicry of Marcus's gesture. Impossible, whispered a Deltarian student who had been recording the lecture. Predators don't exhibit ceremonial behavior. Non-sentient predators don't, Marcus corrected, straightening up. He looked directly into what might have been the Void Hunter's eyes, though its light-absorbing nature made it difficult to be certain. But what if it's not non-sentient? Professor Kethvar's claws clattered against his datapad as he frantically took notes. The implications. If you're correct, then every research facility has been essentially torturing a sentient being while trying to study it. That would explain the escapes, Marcus said, never breaking eye contact with the creature. And the deaths. It wasn't random predatory behavior. It was self-defense and revenge. The Void Hunter took another step closer to the barrier, its form seeming to solidify slightly as it focused its attention on Marcus. When it spoke, its voice came from everywhere and nowhere, bypassing the audio systems entirely and resonating directly in the minds of everyone present. Finally, the voice said, carrying undertones of ancient weariness and bitter amusement, one who sees. The remaining students scattered like startled prey animals, but Marcus held his ground. Professor Kethvar's legs nearly gave out, but he managed to keep recording. You can speak, Marcus said, not really a question. I have always spoken. Your kind simply never listened. The Void Hunter's form shifted slightly, becoming more defined, more deliberately humanoid. They cage me, study me, test me, then wonder why I respond with violence. The other research facilities, Marcus began, treated me as a specimen, poked and prodded and tried to break me down into component parts for their understanding. The creature's voice carried no anger, only tired resignation. I defended myself. I escaped when I could. I survived. Professor Kethvar found his voice, though it trembled. Why? Why didn't you try to communicate before? The Void Hunter's attention shifted to the professor, and Kethvar immediately understood why his colleagues had been so terrified. The creature's focus was like being examined by a force of nature. I tried. They interpreted my attempts at communication as aggressive behavior. When I remained still, they assumed I was planning an attack. When I moved, they increased security measures. There was no action I could take that they would not interpret as threatening. But you recognized something different about me, Marcus said. You observe without fear scent. You analyze without the assumption of superiority. You bow instead of demanding submission. The Void Hunter paused. You hunt as I hunt. The statement sent a chill through the lecture hall. Marcus felt the weight of every gaze in the room, suddenly understanding why his presence at the academy had caused such subtle discomfort among his classmates. I'm not a predator, Marcus said carefully. No? The Void Hunter's form seemed to ripple with what might have been amusement. You sit in a room full of prey animals, analyzing the hunting patterns of apex predators with academic interest rather than instinctive terror. You approach a creature that has killed 17 trained researchers without hesitation or fear. You recognize behavior patterns that trained xenobiologists miss entirely. Marcus felt the truth of it settling in his mind like pieces of a puzzle clicking into place. Around him, his classmates watched with a mixture of fascination and growing unease. What are you saying? Professor Kethavar asked, though his tone suggested he was beginning to understand. The Void Hunter's attention returned to Marcus, and its voice carried a note of something that might have been respect. I am saying that this one hunts with his mind rather than his claws, but he hunts nonetheless. I recognize a fellow apex predator when I see one. The silence that followed the Void Hunter's declaration stretched like a taut wire ready to snap. Marcus could feel the weight of every stare in the lecture hall, from Professor Kethavar's compound eyes to Sisk's confused reptilian gaze. The other students who had remained began to back away again, but this time their fear seemed directed as much at Marcus as at the contained predator. That's ridiculous, stammered a Procyon student, her fur bristling with anxiety. Humans are herbivores. They eat plants and synthesize proteins. They're not predators. The Void Hunter's form rippled with what could only be described as dark amusement. Tell me, Plant Eater, how does your species hunt? We don't hunt, the Procyon replied indignantly. We gather. We cultivate. We build communities and share resources. And when resources become scarce, when your communities are threatened? The student fell silent, her ears flattening against her skull. Marcus found himself speaking almost without conscious thought. We compete. We strategize. We form alliances and break them when necessary. We adapt our tactics based on the opposition we face. Exactly, the Void Hunter said, its voice carrying approval. You hunt resources, territory, advantage, knowledge. You simply don't call it hunting. Professor Kethavar's claws clicked nervously as he processed this information. But humans don't have the physical adaptations of predators. No claws, no fangs, no natural weapons. Neither do I, the Void Hunter replied. My strength comes from intelligence, adaptation, patience. Physical weapons are merely tools. The mind is the true weapon of an apex predator. Marcus stepped closer to the containment field, close enough that the energy barrier hummed audibly. You said I hunt with my mind. What did you mean? You entered this room knowing you would face creatures designed to kill. You positioned yourself to observe all threats while maintaining escape routes. When others fled, you moved closer to gather more information. You identified behavioral patterns in minutes that trained researchers missed over months of study. The Void Hunter paused, its form shifting to face Marcus more directly. And most telling of all, you recognized me as sentient not through empathy or moral consideration, but through tactical analysis. You understood that random violence is inefficient and inefficiency is not a trait of apex predators. A chill ran down Marcus's spine as he realized the accuracy of the creature's assessment. He had been analyzing everything from the moment he entered the classroom, cataloging exits, evaluating threats, positioning himself for optimal observation. It was so natural he hadn't even been conscious of doing it. This is absurd, interrupted a tall Canopian student, his crystalline features reflecting the light from the containment fields. Humans are members of the Galactic community. They're peaceful. They don't even have a military anymore. Marcus felt a bitter smile tug at the corner of his mouth. We don't need one. We have economic leverage, technological dependency networks, and diplomatic agreements that make military force unnecessary. Why destroy your enemies when you can make them dependent on you? The words had come out automatically. But as soon as he said them, Marcus realized how they sounded to his non-human classmates. The Canopian student's crystal face actually changed color, shifting from clear to a murky brown that indicated distress. You're talking about conquest, Sisk said quietly, his blue scales darkening. Predatory behavior. I'm talking about survival, Marcus replied, then stopped himself. Was that really what he had been talking about? Or had the Void Hunter's words triggered something he had never consciously acknowledged? Professor Kethavar was recording everything, his scientific excitement overriding his fear. This is unprecedented. We're witnessing interspecies recognition between apex predators. The behavioral implications are staggering. Professor, Marcus said, turning away from the Void Hunter for the first time since their exchange began. What do you know about human history, before they joined the Galactic community? Kethavar's compound eyes shifted as he accessed his memory banks. Limited information. Humans emerged from their home system approximately 200 standard years ago. They were relatively primitive technologically, but advanced rapidly after first contact with Centaurian traders. What about before that? What do the historical records show? Very little. The Galactic community's xenoarchaeology teams weren't permitted to study human civilization extensively. Your species claimed it was for cultural preservation reasons. Marcus nodded slowly. Cultural preservation. That's one way to put it. The Void Hunter's voice cut through the discussion like a blade. They hide their history because it would terrify their prey. We're not prey, the Procyon student protested, but her voice lacked conviction. No? The Void Hunter's attention fixed on her. Your species developed faster than light travel 3,000 years ago. In all that time, how many worlds have you colonized? 17, she replied automatically. The Centaurians? 43. The Canopians? 58. And the humans in less than 200 years? The student fell silent. Marcus knew the answer, and judging by the expressions around the room, so did everyone else. 137, Marcus said quietly, and most of those were previously inhabited. Previously inhabited by whom? The Void Hunter pressed. By species that were willing to share, Marcus replied, the euphemism tasting bitter in his mouth, or species that found it economically advantageous to relocate. Professor Kethvar's claws trembled as he made connections his academic mind couldn't avoid. The Zarian migration, the Deltarian resettlement programs, the Aquarian habitat exchanges. All voluntary, Marcus said, but even he could hear the hollowness in his voice. All mutually beneficial, all perfect predation, the Void Hunter corrected. No violence, no obvious aggression, just subtle pressure, economic manipulation, and social engineering until the prey voluntarily moves aside. The lecture hall had become completely silent, except for the humming of the containment fields. Even the Ripper had stopped its attacks, as if sensing that something more dangerous than physical violence was being discussed. Sisk spoke into the silence, his voice barely a whisper. Marcus, is that true? Did your species drive others away from their homes? Marcus looked at his friend, this gentle reptilian being who had been nothing but kind to him since his arrival at the academy. He thought about the official histories, the diplomatic language, the careful omissions in the textbooks. We called it economic development, he said finally, resource optimization, mutual benefit agreements, but yes, we identified what we wanted, developed strategies to obtain it, and implemented those strategies with efficiency that would make any apex predator proud. The Void Hunter's form seemed to solidify further, becoming more distinctly humanoid. And now you understand why you recognize me and why I recognize you. We are the same thing, you and I. Apex predators who have learned that the most effective hunting is the kind that leaves no trace of violence. Marcus stared at the creature, seeing in its dark form a reflection he had never wanted to acknowledge. Around him, his classmates looked at him with new eyes, and for the first time since arriving at the academy, he truly understood why his presence had made them so uncomfortable. They had sensed, on some instinctive level, exactly what he was. The revelation hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Marcus could see the exact moment when each of his classmates began to reassess every interaction they had ever had with him. Sisk's blue scales had darkened to an almost navy color, and the Procyon student had actually started grooming herself, a nervous behavior her species displayed when feeling threatened. Professor Kethvar broke the silence, his scientific curiosity warring with growing unease. If what you're suggesting is true, then we need to understand the implications. Two apex predator species in the same galaxy, one of which has successfully integrated into the galactic community without anyone realizing what they truly are. We realized, the Void Hunter said, its voice carrying centuries of bitter experience. Why do you think your kind kept finding us in the darkest regions of space? We fled to the edges of the galaxy to avoid you. Marcus felt a cold weight settling in his stomach. How many others? How many species have moved to the galactic rim because of us? You would know better than I. How many species have voluntarily relocated to preserve their unique cultural heritage in the outer systems? The numbers floated through Marcus's mind, statistics he had memorized for his xenosociology courses without ever questioning the pattern. Dozens of species, hundreds of worlds, all choosing to move away from the increasingly human-dominated core systems. The ethereal collective, he whispered. The plasma shepherds. The crystal singers. All too dangerous to leave near your expanding territory, the Void Hunter confirmed. All relocated to regions where they couldn't interfere with your growth. Sisk found his voice, though it cracked with emotion. But humans helped with those relocations. The galactic community praised your species for facilitating peaceful transitions. Marcus closed his eyes, pieces of galactic history clicking together with horrible clarity. We didn't force anyone to leave. We just made staying increasingly difficult. How? Demanded the Canopian student, his crystalline features now a deep, angry red. Marcus opened his eyes and looked directly at his classmate. Economic pressure. We identified what each species needed to thrive, then gradually assumed control of those resources. The ethereal collective required specific energy frequencies for their reproduction cycles. We became the primary suppliers of frequency generators. When they expressed concerns about our expansion into their territory, the delivery schedules became unreliable. That's monstrous, the Procyon student breathed. That's survival, Marcus replied, then immediately hated himself for the words. No, that's not right. That's conquest disguised as cooperation. The Void Hunter moved closer to the barrier, its form now fully humanoid in outline. The perfect predator leaves its prey believing they made the choice to become prey. Your species has elevated that principle to an art form. Professor Cathvar was frantically taking notes, but his compound eyes kept darting between Marcus and the exits. Student Chen, I need to ask you a direct question. Are you here as a genuine exchange student, or are you conducting some form of analysis for human expansion into academy space? The question hit Marcus like a physical blow. He thought about his arrival at the academy, his careful selection of courses, his methodical observation of student behavior and social structures. He thought about the detailed reports he had been sending back to Earth, officially for his thesis but actually compiled with far more precision than any academic work required. I don't know, he said honestly. I thought I was here to study, but now I'm wondering if I was really here to evaluate. Evaluate what? Sisk asked, his voice small and frightened. Marcus looked at his friend. This kind, gentle being who had shared his lunch and helped him understand galactic community social customs. Whether the academy represents a threat to human interests. Whether the species here could pose problems for future expansion. Whether the knowledge being developed here could be useful. The words tasted like poison in his mouth, but they felt true in a way that his original motivation had never quite managed. The research facilities, the Void Hunter said suddenly, the ones that captured and studied me. Who funded them? Professor Kethavar's claws clicked rapidly as he accessed public records. Multiple sources. Government grants, private research foundations, corporate-sponsored. His clicking stopped abruptly. Oh no. What? Several students asked simultaneously. 73% of the funding came from human-controlled corporations, shell companies and subsidiaries, but the ownership trails lead back to Earth. The lecture hall erupted in panicked voices. Students began backing toward the exits again, but this time they weren't fleeing from the contained predators. They were fleeing from Marcus. You were studying me for them, the Void Hunter said, its voice cutting through the chaos. Every facility that captured me, every researcher who tortured me, they were gathering data for your species. Marcus felt the world spinning around him. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. But you understand now why it makes perfect sense, the creature pressed. An apex predator species would naturally want to understand potential threats. They would want to know how other predators think, how they hunt, how they can be contained or controlled. Or eliminated. Marcus whispered, the full implications hitting him like a tsunami. If humans expand into Void Hunter territory, we would be exterminated. Not through warfare, which would be messy and draw attention. Through careful manipulation. Our food sources would become contaminated. Our breeding grounds would be declared environmental hazards. Our young would mysteriously sicken and die. The Void Hunter's form began to shift again, becoming less human and more of the terrible absence it had been initially. And it would all appear to be natural causes or perhaps the unfortunate result of our own aggressive nature. Professor Kethvar's voice shook as he spoke. The research data from all those facilities. Where is it now? Marcus already knew the answer, and the knowledge made him feel physically sick. Integrated into the galactic community's xenobiology databases. Available to any researcher with proper clearance. Available to human researchers, Sisk said, understanding dawning in his eyes. You've been mapping the weaknesses of every dangerous species in the galaxy. Not me personally, Marcus protested, but even as he said it, he realized how weak the denial sounded. I'm just a student. Are you? The Void Hunter asked. Or are you exactly what every prey animal's instincts have been telling them you are? A predator gathering intelligence on potential threats and future hunting grounds? Marcus looked around the lecture hall at the faces of his classmates. Some showed fear, others disgust, but worst of all were the ones that showed disappointment. Sisk's expression in particular was devastating in its quiet betrayal. I came here to learn, Marcus said desperately. I wanted to understand other species, to build bridges between humanity and the galactic community. And how better to understand your prey, the Void Hunter said with terrible gentleness, than to live among them, to earn their trust, to see them at their most vulnerable. The containment field hummed between them, the only barrier between two apex predators who were finally seeing each other clearly. Around them, the other specimens had fallen silent, as if sensing that something far more dangerous than physical violence was being revealed. Marcus realized, with dawning horror, that every report he had sent back to Earth, every cultural observation, every social analysis, had been exactly the kind of intelligence a predator species would need to ensure successful integration and eventual dominance. He had been hunting all along. He just hadn't realized his prey was everyone he had come to care about. The revelation hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Marcus could see the exact moment when each of his classmates began to reassess every interaction they had ever had with him. Sisk's blue scales had darkened to an almost navy color, and the Procyon student had actually started grooming herself, a nervous behavior her species displayed when feeling threatened. Professor Cathvar broke the silence, his scientific curiosity warring with growing unease. If what you're suggesting is true, then we need to understand the implications. Two apex predator species in the same galaxy, one of which has successfully integrated into the galactic community without anyone realizing what they truly are. We realized, the Void Hunter said, its voice carrying centuries of bitter experience. Why do you think your kind kept finding us in the darkest regions of space? We fled to the edges of the galaxy to avoid you. Marcus felt a cold weight settling in his stomach. How many others? How many species have moved to the galactic rim because of us? You would know better than I. How many species have voluntarily relocated to preserve their unique cultural heritage in the outer systems? The numbers floated through Marcus's mind, statistics he had memorized for his xenosociology courses without ever questioning the pattern. Dozens of species, hundreds of worlds, all choosing to move away from the increasingly human-dominated core systems. The ethereal collective, he whispered. The plasma shepherds. The crystal singers. All too dangerous to leave near your expanding territory, the Void Hunter confirmed. All relocated to regions where they couldn't interfere with your growth. Sisk found his voice, though it cracked with emotion. But humans helped with those relocations. The galactic community praised your species for facilitating peaceful transitions. Marcus closed his eyes, pieces of galactic history clicking together with horrible clarity. We didn't force anyone to leave. We just made staying increasingly difficult. How? Demanded the Canopian student, his crystalline features now a deep, angry red. Marcus opened his eyes and looked directly at his classmate. Economic pressure. We identified what each species needed to thrive, then gradually assumed control of those resources. The ethereal collective required specific energy frequencies for their reproduction cycles. We became the primary suppliers of frequency generators. When they expressed concerns about our expansion into their territory, the delivery schedules became unreliable. That's monstrous, the Procyon student breathed. That's survival, Marcus replied, then immediately hated himself for the words. No, that's not right. That's conquest disguised as cooperation. The Void Hunter moved closer to the barrier, its form now fully humanoid in outline. The perfect predator leaves its prey believing they made the choice to become prey. Your species has elevated that principle to an art form. Professor Cathvar was frantically taking notes, but his compound eyes kept darting between Marcus and the exits. Student Chen, I need to ask you a direct question. Are you here as a genuine exchange student, or are you conducting some form of analysis for human expansion into academy space? The question hit Marcus like a physical blow. He thought about his arrival at the academy, his careful selection of courses, his methodical observation of student behavior and social structures. He thought about the detailed reports he had been sending back to Earth, officially for his thesis but actually compiled with far more precision than any academic work required. I don't know, he said honestly. I thought I was here to study, but now I'm wondering if I was really here to evaluate. Evaluate what? Sisk asked, his voice small and frightened. Marcus looked at his friend. This kind, gentle being who had shared his lunch and helped him understand Galactic community social customs. Whether the Academy represents a threat to human interests. Whether the species here could pose problems for future expansion. Whether the knowledge being developed here could be useful. The words tasted like poison in his mouth, but they felt true in a way that his original motivation had never quite managed. The research facilities, the Void Hunter said suddenly, the ones that captured and studied me. Who funded them? Professor Kethavar's claws clicked rapidly as he accessed public records. Multiple sources. Government grants, private research foundations, corporate-sponsored. His clicking stopped abruptly. Oh no. What? Several students asked simultaneously. 73% of the funding came from human-controlled corporations, shell companies and subsidiaries, but the ownership trails lead back to Earth. The lecture hall erupted in panicked voices. Students began backing toward the exits again, but this time they weren't fleeing from the contained predators. They were fleeing from Marcus. You were studying me for them, the Void Hunter said, its voice cutting through the chaos. Every facility that captured me, every researcher who tortured me, they were gathering data for your species. Marcus felt the world spinning around him. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. But you understand now why it makes perfect sense, the creature pressed. An apex predator species would naturally want to understand potential threats. They would want to know how other predators think, how they hunt, how they can be contained or controlled. Or eliminated. Marcus whispered, the full implications hitting him like a tsunami. If humans expand into Void Hunter territory, we would be exterminated. Not through warfare, which would be messy and draw attention. Through careful manipulation. Our food sources would become contaminated. Our breeding grounds would be declared environmental hazards. Our young would mysteriously sicken and die. The Void Hunter's form began to shift again, becoming less human and more of the terrible absence it had been initially. And it would all appear to be natural causes or perhaps the unfortunate result of our own aggressive nature. Professor Kethavar's voice shook as he spoke. The research data from all those facilities. Where is it now? Marcus already knew the answer, and the knowledge made him feel physically sick. Integrated into the Galactic community's xenobiology databases. Available to any researcher with proper clearance. Available to human researchers, Sisk said, understanding dawning in his eyes. You've been mapping the weaknesses of every dangerous species in the galaxy. Not me personally, Marcus protested, but even as he said it, he realized how weak the denial sounded. I'm just a student. Are you? The Void Hunter asked. Or are you exactly what every prey animal's instincts have been telling them you are? A predator gathering intelligence on potential threats and future hunting grounds? Marcus looked around the lecture hall at the faces of his classmates. Some showed fear, others disgust, but worst of all were the ones that showed disappointment. Sisk's expression in particular was devastating in its quiet betrayal. I came here to learn, Marcus said desperately. I wanted to understand other species, to build bridges between humanity and the Galactic community. And how better to understand your prey, the Void Hunter said with terrible gentleness, than to live among them, to earn their trust, to see them at their most vulnerable. The containment field hummed between them, the only barrier between two apex predators who were finally seeing each other clearly. Around them, the other specimens had fallen silent, as if sensing that something far more dangerous than physical violence was being revealed. Marcus realized, with dawning horror, that every report he had sent back to Earth, every cultural observation, every social analysis, had been exactly the kind of intelligence a predator species would need to ensure successful integration and eventual dominance. He had been hunting all along. He just hadn't realized his prey was everyone he had come to care about. The emergency lighting flickered on as Professor Kethavar finally activated the classroom's alert protocols. The harsh red illumination cast everything in ominous shadows, making the Void Hunter's form even more disturbing as it seemed to drink in the light around it. Security is en route, Kethavar announced, his voice professionally calm despite the tremor in his claws. All students should evacuate in an orderly fashion. But nobody moved. The revelation of what Marcus represented had frozen everyone in place more effectively than any physical threat. The academic discussion had become something far more personal and terrifying. "Professor," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the chaos in his mind. "What happens now?" "To me, I honestly don't know," Kethavar replied. "This situation is unprecedented. We've never had to deal with the discovery that a student species is potentially predatory toward the rest of the galactic community." The Void Hunter's laugh was like the sound of reality tearing. "You still don't understand. This isn't a discovery. This is an admission. Your galactic community has known what humans are from the beginning." "That's impossible," protested a Deltarian student who had remained silent until now. "The galactic community has protocols for evaluating new species. Predatory species aren't permitted. Membership. Show me the evaluation records for humanity," the Void Hunter challenged. Professor Kethvar's compound eyes reflected the emergency lighting as he accessed the Academy's archives. His silence stretched uncomfortably long. "Professor?" Zisk prompted. "The records are classified at a level I don't have access to," Kethvar admitted, "which is unusual. Evaluation records are typically part of the public xenobiological database." Marcus felt another piece of the puzzle click into place. They knew. The galactic community leadership knew what we were when they accepted us. "Why would they do that?" the Procyon student asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The Void Hunter's form solidified again, taking on an almost lecturing posture. "Because apex predators can be useful if properly controlled. Who better to handle problem species than another predator? Who better to manage resource extraction than a species that excels at it? The Hegemony War," Marcus said suddenly, memories from his galactic history courses flooding back. 15 years ago, the Taraxian hegemony was expanding aggressively into community space. Humanity volunteered to lead the diplomatic efforts to resolve the situation. "And how did that resolve?" Kethavar asked, though his tone suggested he already suspected the answer. The Taraxian leadership was convinced to adopt a more peaceful expansion policy. They withdrew from contested systems and focused on internal development. Marcus paused, his stomach churning. Within 5 years, their birth rates had dropped by 60%. Some kind of genetic compatibility issue with their new agricultural systems. Agricultural systems designed and provided by human corporations, the Void Hunter added. How convenient that the solution to their aggression happened to render them incapable of expansion. The lecture hall filled with horrified silence. Even the contained specimens seemed to sense the weight of what was being discussed. "The Nexus collective crisis," Sisk said slowly. "Humans resolved that one too. The collective agreed to limit their technological development in exchange for guaranteed resource rights. Resource rights administered by human oversight committees," Marcus continued, the pattern becoming unavoidably clear. "Who ensure that Nexus technology never advances beyond what the community deems safe." "Safe for whom?" the Void Hunter asked pointedly. Marcus looked at his classmates, these beings he had grown to care about over the past months. "Safe for human expansion. We're not just members of the galactic community. We're the community's designated predators, the species they use to handle threats they can't deal with directly. And now you understand why I recognized you," the Void Hunter said. "Your species has been hunting mine for decades. Every facility that captured and studied my kind, every research program designed to understand how we think and how we can be contained, all of it funded and directed by human interests." Professor Kethvar was still accessing archives, his movements becoming increasingly frantic. "There are patterns here I never noticed before. Species conflicts that were resolved by human intervention, after which the aggressive species somehow became less capable of future expansion." "How many?" Marcus asked, though he dreaded the answer. 17 major interventions over the past 2 centuries, all resulting in the neutralization of species that could potentially challenge human expansion. The Deltarian student's crystalline features had gone completely transparent with shock. "You've been systematically eliminating competition." "Not eliminating," Marcus corrected automatically, then stopped himself. "Containing, managing, ensuring they remain at manageable threat levels." "Exactly what they tried to do to me," the Void Hunter said. "But I was too dangerous to manage safely, so the plan was probably eventual elimination once they had gathered enough data." Marcus felt the weight of his species' actions settling on his shoulders, like a physical burden. "I need to contact Earth. I need to understand what role I'm really playing here." You're playing the role of advanced reconnaissance, the Void Hunter replied. Evaluate the Academy's research capabilities. Assess the potential threat posed by an institution that brings together the galaxy's brightest minds from multiple species. Determine whether this concentration of knowledge and talent represents a future problem for human hegemony. The accuracy of the assessment hit Marcus like a punch to the gut. His course selections, his research topics, his careful analysis of student capabilities and social structures, it all fit the pattern of intelligence gathering. But I chose to come here, he protested. The exchange program was voluntary. Earth didn't assign me to this mission, didn't they? Sisk asked quietly. Marcus, you told me once that you were selected for this program out of thousands of applicants. That Human Education Authority specifically recommended you for xenobiology studies, that your passage and expenses were fully covered by educational grants. Marcus felt the ground shift beneath his feet. You think they manipulated me into thinking it was my choice? I think, the Void Hunter said with something that might have been sympathy, that the perfect predator doesn't just hunt effectively. It creates hunters who don't even realize they're hunting. The sound of approaching security teams echoed through the corridors outside. Heavy footsteps and the whir of scanning equipment suggested a significant response force was being deployed. They're coming for you, Professor Kethvar observed. Both of you, probably. Marcus nodded, understanding that his time at the academy was over, but as he looked at the Void Hunter, still contained behind its barrier, a different kind of understanding began to form. You could have escaped, he said suddenly. At any time during this demonstration, you could have broken out of that containment field. You're far more dangerous than the other specimens, but you've made no attempt to flee. Correct, the Void Hunter replied. Why? The creature's form shifted again, becoming almost human in appearance. Because running has accomplished nothing. Hiding at the galactic rim has accomplished nothing. Fighting back has accomplished nothing. Perhaps it's time to try something different, such as making sure that one human at least understands what his species truly is, and what the consequences of that nature might be. The security teams were getting closer. Marcus could hear them coordinating through the corridors, setting up containment protocols, preparing for multiple dangerous specimens. What consequences? He asked. The Void Hunter looked directly at him, its dark eyes reflecting depths that seemed to go on forever. The galaxy is vast, human, but it is not infinite. Eventually, you will run out of species to manage, resources to control, territories to expand into. And when that happens, what do you think an apex predator species will do when it has consumed everything else in its environment? The question hung in the air like a death sentence as the security teams burst through the lecture hall doors. Marcus found himself surrounded by beings in heavy armor, carrying containment equipment designed for the most dangerous specimens in the galaxy. Their leader, a massive Ursoid with ceremonial scars marking his rank, surveyed the scene with practiced efficiency. Professor Kethvar, report, the security chief rumbled, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to crisis situations. We have a Code 7 situation. Chief Grextar, Kethvar replied, his compound eyes darting between Marcus and the Void Hunter. Potential breach of containment protocols and other complications. The specimens are still contained, Chief Grextar observed, scanning the 3 active containment fields. What other complications? Marcus stepped forward before the professor could respond. The complication is me, Chief. I'm the security risk. The Ursoid's attention fixed on Marcus with startling intensity. Explain. I'm not sure I can, Marcus replied honestly. I came here thinking I was a student. It turns out I might be something else entirely. He's human intelligence gathering, Sisk said suddenly, his voice filled with hurt and betrayal. Everything he's been doing here has been reconnaissance for human expansion. Chief Grextar's massive head turned toward the reptilian student. That's a serious accusation. Do you have evidence? I have a confession, Marcus said quietly, and I have questions about why the galactic community really accepted humanity as members. The security chief was silent for a long moment, his scarred features unreadable. Then he made a gesture to his team, and they began setting up additional containment equipment around Marcus. You're containing me too? Marcus asked. Protocol for potentially dangerous sentience, Grextar replied matter-of-factly. Until we can determine the level of threat you represent. I'm not dangerous. I don't have weapons or combat training. I'm just a student. The Void Hunter's voice cut through the discussion like a blade. Show them your academic records, human. Show them what you've been studying with such dedication. Marcus felt his blood chill as he realized what the creature meant. His course selections, his research topics, the areas of expertise he had been developing, they formed a pattern that was unmistakable once you knew what to look for. Xenobiology, he said reluctantly. Interspecies psychology, galactic economics, resource management, cultural integration studies. Chief Grextar's expression didn't change, but Marcus could see understanding dawning in the security chief's eyes. A comprehensive intelligence-gathering curriculum. It wasn't supposed to be, Marcus protested. I thought I was preparing for a career in diplomatic services. Perhaps you were, the Void Hunter said with dark amusement. Human diplomatic services. Professor Kethvar had been accessing more archived records during the exchange. Chief Grextar, I've been reviewing historical data on human integration into the community. There are concerning patterns that suggest this situation may be more complex than a single student intelligence operation. Explain. Human involvement in 17 major interspecies conflicts over the past 2 centuries. In every case, the resolution resulted in the permanent weakening of species that could potentially challenge human expansion. The security chief's scarred features darkened. You're suggesting systematic predation disguised as diplomatic intervention. I'm suggesting, Kethvar said carefully, that we may need to reevaluate our understanding of humanity's role in the galactic community. Marcus watched as the beings around him processed this information. These were individuals he had worked with, studied alongside, considered friends. Now they were looking at him like he was a dangerous specimen that had somehow escaped containment. Chief, one of the security officers called out, we're receiving priority communications from the Academy administration. They want immediate transfer of all involved parties to Central Command. All parties? Grextar asked. The human student and the Void Hunter specimen. Separate containment, maximum security protocols. Marcus felt panic rising in his chest. What does that mean? What happens at Central Command? Interrogation, the Void Hunter answered before anyone else could speak. Psychological analysis. Memory extraction if they deem it necessary. They'll want to know everything you've learned, everything you've reported, everything you suspect. And for you? Termination, most likely. I know too much about their research programs, too much about how they've been using my species' capture and study to develop containment protocols for other dangerous sentients. Chief Grextar was coordinating with his team, preparing for transport. Both subjects will be transferred within the hour. Professor Kethvar, you'll need to provide complete records of today's incident and all previous interactions with the human student. Wait, Marcus said desperately. There has to be another way to handle this. I'm willing to cooperate fully. I'll answer any questions, provide any information you need. The decision isn't mine to make, Grextar replied, though his tone suggested he might have sympathy for Marcus's situation. This goes far beyond Academy security protocols. Sisk stepped forward, his blue scales still dark with distress. Chief Marcus has been here for months. If he was really dangerous, if he was really gathering intelligence for some human plot, wouldn't he have done something by now? Perhaps he was waiting for the right opportunity, suggested the Deltarian student. Gathering long-term intelligence for future use. Or perhaps, the Void Hunter interjected, he was being prepared for a role he didn't understand. The perfect intelligence asset is one who doesn't know they're an asset. Marcus felt the weight of that possibility settling over him like a shroud. You think they programmed me somehow? Conditioned me to gather information without realizing what I was doing? I think, the Void Hunter replied, that your species excels at creating situations where their victims make choices that serve human interests while believing they're acting independently. But I chose to come here. I applied for the exchange program. I selected my courses. Did you? Or did you select from options that were carefully designed to lead you to the choices they wanted you to make? Marcus tried to remember the decision-making process that had led him to the academy. The guidance counselors who had recommended xenobiology, the professors who had suggested specific research areas, the educational grants that had made the exchange program financially attractive. Each choice had felt completely voluntary at the time. But now, looking back with the Void Hunter's words echoing in his mind, he could see how each decision point had been subtly influenced, each option crafted to lead him toward a specific outcome. They made me into a spy without telling me I was a spy, he whispered. They made you into something more dangerous than a spy, the Void Hunter corrected. They made you into a weapon that doesn't know it's a weapon. A predator that hunts with kindness and curiosity instead of claws and fangs. The containment field generators hummed to life around Marcus, creating a barrier similar to the ones holding the captured specimens. He was no longer a student. He was no longer even truly human in the eyes of his classmates. He was a dangerous predator in containment, waiting to be transferred to whatever fate the galactic community deemed appropriate for his kind. And the worst part was that he was beginning to understand that the Void Hunter was right. He was dangerous, not because of any conscious malice, but because his very nature, his very way of thinking and analyzing and relating to others, was predatory in ways he had never recognized. As the security team prepared for transport, Marcus looked one last time at the faces of his classmates. In their expressions, he saw fear, disappointment, and something else that cut deeper than either. He saw the recognition that they had all been prey animals who had unknowingly befriended their predator.